بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، أما بعد. الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نرحب بكم في هذه الدردشة الرقمية التي دائما نطل بها عليكم بإشراف وتنسيق بين وزارة التقنية والاتصالات بسلطنة، والتي دائما نحاول نشر من خلالها نشر المعلومة والفائدة للجميع. اليوم بإذن الله دردشتنا الرقمية بعنوان البيانات المفتوحة وصنع القرار. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so happy to have you in this session. We are going to talk about the things very important subject. So I'm so happy to welcome Miss Alex Sergov at the head of international delivery at the UK government digital service. Miss Alex, good morning, and we are so happy and so delighted and so honored to have you in this session.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So pleasure. So before getting inside the session, I would like to read the CV of Alex Segrov. Ms. Alex Segrov is the head of international delivery at the UK government digital service, and she has the extensive experience working in digital delivery in both public and private sector. Alex joined the GDS at the end of the transition in 2014 and has led delivery for GDS, largest, most complex business areas, government at UK, GDS, business operations, and the Gov at UK, identify the assurance. Prior to joining the government, Alex worked in the user-centric digital agencies that focus on the digital transformation for corporate and public sector services such as the HSBC, Oxford University, and Electrolux. So valuable a CV of Alex. So we are going to have 45 minutes the session with Miss Alex, and the last 15 minutes we are going to open for the questions. So the word for you now, Miss Alex, and see you after 45 minutes. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Okay, I am going to share my screen and see if I can't present my presentation. Okay, bear with me just 1 second. There we go. I'm hoping everyone can see my title slide. Again, thank you so much for inviting me to speak this morning. I have put together a presentation about how we think about open data in the UK government, and sort of our approach to it, how we manage open data across the government, and how that impacts, or how we consider transparency for citizens and the implications for that. I'm also wanting to talk a little bit about how that has helped stimulate the private sector and produced opportunities in that space. So that's what I'm hoping to talk to you, that's what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. I do look forward to any questions that you have. Please bob them in the chat channel if you would like to, otherwise hold on to them until the end, and I'll look to address as many of them as I possibly can. So, right, here we go, the government digital service. I'm going to start with a very, very quick whistle-stop introduction to the government digital service, or as we always refer to it as GDS. So GDS champions the digital transformation of government. We use digital tools, techniques, and ways of working to help government work better for everybody. So that's citizens, businesses, and other civil servants. We establish standards for digital and technology and in government, and through spending controls and service standards and the technology code of practice. And we've been doing this since we were set up in approximately 2011. Under normal circumstances, you'd find us here in this picture here. This is our main office in the Whitechapel building in East London. You can see various people sitting on our balconies to do their work. And I have to admit, I'm a common user of our balconies to do some quiet working. Right now, as for so many people across the world, our office environment looks a little different for myself and my 800 colleagues who pivoted to remote working in March of this year. But pandemic or no, it's our job to lead from the centre as part of the Cabinet Office of Her Majesty's Government, adopting a wide angle view of the big issues and common problems departments face. By heading up the digital data and technology function, we set the digital direction across government and make sure the right expertise and resources are available at the right place and the right time. We strongly believe that data should be open, it should be timely, it should be meaningful, and it should be actionable. Or else why are you collecting it? You have to ask that question. Data is really important, obviously, as it underpins everything. And in the Government Digital Service, we have 3 objectives around data. And those are enabling the delivery of better public services through better access to good digital data, driving open, trusted and ethical approaches to data, and supporting innovation and improving our data science capability to make better use of the data that we do collect. But what do we mean by data and why does it matter? So by data, we mean information that's held digitally. It can be personal information about an individual, or facts and figures or other information that do not reveal the identity of a person if possible. We receive this data from a wide range of sources, including from citizens, through applications for services, from our national and official statistics via our various censuses. We have machine-generated data. We have some open and third-party data. We collect data from social media or from feedback or usage stats from our website. Now we know that the volume of data is growing. And when I put this together, I couldn't believe some of these statistics. But so 90% of the data currently in the world was created in the last 2 years, which is ever so slightly terrifying. In 2014, so that's a little bit old now, there were 204 million emails every minute. And Google reported 4 million search queries every minute. So you can imagine how many more there are now. And the total amount of global data is predicted to grow 40% year on year for the next decade. So that's quite a significant amount of data. Now, in the UK, our Centre for Economic and Business Research and the data management company SAS predict that big data will benefit the UK economy over the next 5 years, over the past 5 years, sorry, by over 200 billion. And research suggests that data-driven companies are over 10% more productive than organisations that don't exploit their data. So we're adopting a set of core principles to facilitate and foster the better use of data within government. So as always in Government Digital Service, this is sort of our mantra. We start with user needs. So we build around the needs of users, both inside and outside of government. And that means our citizens, people in business, people in health, medicine, people who are working in housing, and people who are working inside of government. So that will be decision makers, but also people like me, a civil servant, that are trying to deliver on the policies of the day. So building for the real world, we need to develop solutions that all of government can use, allowing for the complexities of government, because governments are tricky, and taking away complexities from users. We need to build foundations that will endure. Otherwise, we'll spend the same money again and again and again, which is not particularly efficient. So we need to design solutions that are flexible, allowing for future changes and making the most of opportunities offered by new technologies, but without affecting the experience of users. We think about being bold, but not reckless. So we need to push for change in the way that government collects, maintains, and uses data, whilst understanding the sensitivities that government faces. We care about the world behind the data, so we want to trust accountability into our solutions and to be transparent about the way government collects and uses data. So, the UK open data model. Now, we've accomplished so much with open standards in the UK government. Huge transformation programs, including the gov.uk website, are all backed by mature and scalable open standards. We're improving the way that documents are generated, edited, and stored by adopting the open document format. Less PDFs. We continue to drive the development of open standards by working with industry and academia and becoming members of standard development organizations like the World Wide Web Consortium, often referred to as the W3C. We know that there are areas of government which have not yet fully embraced these principles, and we're determined to create an environment where openness can succeed. Now, our open data standards are managed by formal government policy. Our current policy is the UK National Action Plan for Open Government. And our open data standards, the open data standard principles were first published in 2012. They were revised in 2018. And as you can see, again in 2018. And they underscore our commitment to digital modernization and increased accountability. With these principles in place, we're on course to recognize the massive efficiency gains of web scale technology. Let me go through some of the high levels of these principles. So open data, open government data promotes transparency, accountability, and creating value by making government data to all with no restrictions for its reuse. By making data sets available, public institutions become more transparent and accountable to citizens. And by encouraging the use, reuse, and free distribution of data sets, governments promote business creation, innovation, and citizen-centric services. My notes. We govern the use of open data in technology at the Government Digital Service with the Technology Code of Practice. We're committed to make a better use of open data by building technology that uses open standards to ensure that it works and communicates with other technology and can be easily upgraded and expanded. The Technology Code of Practice is a set of criteria to help government design, build, and buy technology. It's used as a cross-government agreed standard in our spend controls process, whereby we have a mandated authority from our Treasury to assure every piece of technology purchased or procured to make sure that it complies with our Technology Code of Practice and that it's encouraging reuse where possible. It highlights the importance of open data and is baked into how we contract with suppliers. And I'll talk more about that later. The Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation was established last year in the UK and has been tasked by government to connect policymakers, industry, civil society, and the public to develop the right governance regime for data-driven technologies. We weren't going to get away from it. I was always going to talk about it at some point. So the last few months have shown more than ever the importance of access to data for the running of responsive and effective public services. Excuse me. Coronavirus response teams from across the public sector have needed urgent access to information to understand how the situation is changing day by day and to act accordingly. This environment has seen data shared and used to confront different challenges posed by coronavirus. Data has been shared from our national health system trusts around the country to understand the pressure on hospitals in real time. The private sector has shared data to understand the tracking and forecasting of the spread of the virus. And data, such as our shielded patients lists, have also been shared to support local public service delivery. In a time of crisis, when immediate reasons and benefits are clear, it's evident that data can be shared quickly and public trust is crucial. However, a study that the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation has undertaken before the crisis analysed projects where data had been shared between government departments with commercial organisations, identifying reoccurring barriers and the steps we should be taking to address them. And this really focuses on citizen trust, which the report argues needs to be agreed and addressed if we are to maximise the data, the value of the data that we have held. It includes a new framework to drive forward trustworthy data sharing in the public interest. The report highlighted inconsistent approaches to data sharing solutions, especially the use of different legal gateways and governance mechanisms, which created a complex environment which hinders transparency and accountability. But we can do better, and we must now reflect on what can be learnt from the crisis, where we can transfer data quickly, but to support trustworthy data sharing for the benefit of society. So thinking about opportunities for the private sector, the UK government recognises its role as the largest procurer of products and services in the country. As such, it has a responsibility to stimulate a broad digital economy, one that encourages innovation, it's sustainable, as always transparent, and good value for money for citizens. And remember that action plan for open government. Well, the fourth commitment in the open government plan is open contracting data standards with overarching objective to improve compliance, coverage, and the quality of publication so that public contracts can be tracked from planning through to final spending. Although there is increased compliance with the requirement to publish contract opportunities and awards through a central contracts finder platform, there remains data gaps and limitations that make it difficult for government, the private sector and citizens to understand the full pattern of government procurement and spending, and to identify who government is doing business with. It remains difficult to answer questions such as, how many contracts does government hold with a particular firm? And how close to completion are these? Or how many government tenders are being won by suppliers outside of the United Kingdom? So the Government Digital Service, working with the UK Treasury and Crown Commercial Service, is responsible for digital data and technology spend. So we're not responsible for everything, just specifically digital data and technology. We're also responsible for procurement and contracts for digital data and technology. So we've been reforming how government spends in this particular sector and transforming the market as a result. GDS established the digital marketplace, a set of frameworks that makes procurement simpler for buyers and for sellers. And in practice, this meant lowering the barriers to entry to encourage a more diverse range of suppliers. Designing out as many points of friction as possible by understanding and meeting the needs of buyers and sellers, and democratizing procurement and contracting by engaging with civil society early and often. So as you can see from this slide here, in 2009, you can see some very, very small yellow blobs, basically focused around London. Now, that was what our digital economy landscape, purchasing suppliers for government looked like just over a decade ago. And we estimated that over 16 billion of spend which was about 80% of all our spend, was with about 18 suppliers. So that is not particularly diverse at all. So this is the problem that we were trying to overcome. Now, by simplifying and reforming the market, we leveled the playing field and we set the same set of rules for everyone. So now, this is my favorite slide change. You can see the market looks like this. Some of the limitations that we've placed to encourage diversity means that contracts are limited to 2 years. This means you can't have these decade-long contracts with large suppliers where you're locked in and have lost control. Suppliers are able to offer new services every 9 to 12 months. So you can change what it is that you're doing. You can evolve as technology evolves, and suppliers know that they have the freedom to offer these services to different government purchasers, and they can access the latest technology confidently. Smaller suppliers are able to compete with bigger suppliers more easily because it's far easier to apply to work with government. One of the things that we did was to look at contracts and procurement contracts. We knew that smaller suppliers didn't have the manpower or the procurement capability or the legal capability that larger suppliers did. If you think about small innovative startups, maybe 2 people working in their garden shed, they don't have the same capability that some of the larger global suppliers do to work through hundreds of pages of contracts and procurement process. So we simplified these so that anybody could look in real language without having to think too much about legal fees to be able to get onto our frameworks, which meant that smaller suppliers could compete with bigger suppliers more easily because it was easier to supply and work with government. Subject experts like technical architects didn't have to understand procurement in order to buy what they needed. And now half of government digital spend goes to small, medium enterprises. So we're really, really proud of that, which is great. And what did this mean for enabling commercial use in the private sector as well for data? I'm just going to end with this final example, which is CityMapper, an application. And open data has helped improve public services and enabled the private sector to develop new products such as this, which is a transportation app, CityMapper. And it benefits customers, road users, London, and Transport for London itself. All public Transport for London data, or open data, is freely released for developers to use in their own software and services. There's more than 80 data feeds now available for developers through the free unified API, which ensures accurate real-time data is available from one system for over 13,000 developers. Research has revealed that the provision of this free, accurate and real-time open data is helping the London economy by up to £130 million a year. The research shows that by providing open data to development, Transport for London is improving journeys, saving people's time, supporting innovation and creating jobs. And over 600 applications are being powered specifically by using these Transport for London open data feeds. So that is what I wanted to talk to you about this morning. I wanted to leave quite a bit of time for questions, as I feel that quite often having the dialogue between and being able to get into your specific questions is a valuable use of time as well. So I will stop sharing my screen, I think is what I'm supposed to do, and allow you to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Alex, for the valuable session talking about the open data. Very valuable slides, information. For sure, a lot of the audience, they seek this kind of information. So now we open the questions for Ms. Alex, for any questions. Pointing to her now. So please, everyone who would like to ask a question, put the question in the area of the Q&As. Yes, we wait a couple of seconds still, some of them there right now with their questions.
You can see the little typing.
You took about 25 minutes of the sessions. We opened it for you 45 minutes. Seems that you were very so quickly.
I'm afraid I managed to talk very quickly. So when I practiced,
yeah,
it was longer.
Right.
I also wanted to leave a good amount of time for questions. So
nice.
Sometimes
yeah.
I can understand what particular questions that you have, and I can answer those more specifically.
Yeah. So indeed. Yep. Now the question from Qais Al-Amiri. His question is, do you have a framework for digital transformation? Would like to share this.
Very interesting question that requires quite a lot of unpicking. So Government Digital Service was created to help the rest of government transform as much as anything else. So our framework involves a number of things, and I guess that's put together in the organisation structure of the Government Digital Service. We often think about it as patchwork or a quilted blanket. So there are many pieces that come together to create the whole. I've talked quite a bit about standards in data. Similarly, we think about standards for the creation of digital services. So if we think about a decade ago, before the Government Digital Service existed, we had, I think, over 3,000 individual government websites. They all had different and competing, quite often conflicting sources of information for people to try and understand how they were supposed to engage with the state. We had some digital services. They were sometimes difficult to use for people, and so they weren't being used. And they all felt very different. So a citizen had to understand not only potentially different departments or ministries that they had to engage with in order to complete the task that they had to do or to achieve the goal that they had. They also had to learn how to use different websites in order to try and achieve these goals. So what we wanted to do was create a simple experience for citizens and for businesses with sources of information that they could trust, that wouldn't confuse people, that wouldn't be conflicting, so that they could quickly engage with the state as they needed to. People don't choose to generally to have to engage with the state. It's something that they have to do in order to enable them to do something else. For example, I have to get a passport in order to travel, or I have to get a driver's license in order to drive, or I have to register my business in order to start a business. So often these are enabling functions. So we wanted to make a consistent, easy experience so that people could do this very quickly. And the way that we looked to do that was by developing the single government website as a start and closing all of these other thousands of websites. We also wanted to make it simple and consistent for people to be able to use government services. So having a simple design framework meant that people could understand what it was that they were doing when they were engaging with the state, and they didn't have to be confused or and learn how to use one department's website and then someone else's. So understanding how government works was removed from that particular problem was removed from citizens. And in order to do that, in order to think about a cohesive and sustainable technology estate, we created the Technology Code of Practice, which also covers data, but also service design standards. And these often, these are then held to account by an assurance process. So departments creating services that you access from gov.uk have to follow a set of guidelines to create their services, and then we assure it to make sure that the quality of it is good and it has met the standards. And those standards include things like actually speaking to users. So they have to evidence that they have met user needs through the creation of their service, and they're not just thinking about business needs that they're trying to. So the use of user research is mandatory. We have as part of this assurance session, we would expect the technologists from the team that was creating services to speak with our own assurance technologists to make sure that they were using open data, that they were using open source technology, and that they had considered reuse as part of that approach. We don't use any proprietary software potentially. That means that you can't uplift and shift the technology. So as part of our digital marketplace, when we're engaging with suppliers who are potentially building these services, they have to produce the service in a way that it can be moved to a different supplier. And that's all built into the contracts as well. So you sort of start seeing how all of these pieces fit together to create an ecosystem that's sustainable. That means that the government users are in control of how their technology estate is being created, as opposed to the technology providers being in control. So we also think about the profession of digital data and technology in government. Historically, government outsourced most of its digital data and technology needs. As part of transformation, and this is whether it's in government or in any organization, the idea that we're moving to a more digitally focused delivery mechanism, whether it's via a web service or not, it's going to be more digital. There's going to be more digital elements to it. So we have to think about how to train our staff accordingly and how to upskill them so that they feel confident working in this new environment. And that means that they're more open to change. So much of digital transformation is organization and behavior change. The technology is the easy part. Winning hearts and minds in order for people to feel that there is benefit in them changing, for them to learn new skills, is really, really important. So we have to remove some of those mental barriers for people to feel that they can develop new skills. And they can think about, and new people coming into the civil service can think, actually, there is an exciting digital career for me in a civil service, as opposed to just wanting to work in the private sector, who we're really competing with for the same staff. So thinking about things like professions frameworks, thinking about career development, these things become really, really important. And we had to do quite a bit of work in the early days with our central HR and finance functions to develop career frameworks for developers and technologists, for user researchers, for digital delivery professionals, for digital service designers, and for them to understand how to provide a comparable pay reward to the private sector, which was going to be different from traditional civil service roles. So that was part of our framework for digital transformation, and remains so to this day, as we continue to work with the rest of the government to help them transform. We also looked at what some of the common problems were. We saw that when people were developing new services, they were having to face some of the same problems again and again. So for example, payment gateways, or notification systems, or hosting. And so at the Government Digital Service, we created a unit that is called the Government, oh, hang on, I've nearly lost it there. So the Government as a Platform. So we created common tools and platforms that meant that services could think about the thing. So service teams in ministries and departments could think about the things that were unique to them and focus on them, and then potentially plug in a standard payment gateway or a standard email notification or SMS notification system that meant that citizens always were familiar with a particular transaction process, and that they didn't have to continually spend new money on this. So we didn't have to have, 1,000 different types of payment gateways provided by 1,000 different suppliers. So we wanted to add that element of consistency and reuse to save time and money and to make the experience a little bit better. So we sort of started thinking about this. So it's a very long answer for a very short question, but so we have a framework that we have an organization structure and a governance that allows us to best govern how digital is applied and considered and used across government, to ensure that we have this really simple experience for citizens. And that's really important, because saving time basically saves money. I think a good example is thinking about renewing passports. And if you think in government, each department has a spreadsheet of all of their costs. And in this instance, the passport office, our home office, have a line item for a call centre to manage calls that come in. And by the use of a notification system, it addressed the problem. So we knew that over 80% of telephone calls that came in.
Miss Alex, thank you. Well, after I saw all the questions, I'm afraid that we are not going to go them all. So we'll move to the next questions. That's okay?
Okay. Yep, sure. So reducing...
The next question is from Ayub Al-Alawi. His question is, when it comes to the governance, what are the laws and policies that the UK taking part to manage and facilitate publishing of the open data?
Okay, so I did touch on some of those in the presentation. So we have the open data framework and policies, and our technology code of practice are some of the key elements that we use. So instead of laws in the UK, we have a tendency to use policies and standards, as they are, we find them slightly more flexible to use as opposed to going through a legal process. So by having the standards, which sets out our ambitions and the vision for the use of data, and then through the technology code of practice, which governs a little bit more about the technology approach to the use of open data, that's really how we manage and facilitate how open data is collected and published. We are also compliant with the EU regulations currently for GDMP, which GDPR, sorry, the data privacy regulations. So we're definitely compliant with those as well.
Okay. The question is the same from our friend Qais Al-Amiri. His question is, you mentioned that you are trying to reduce the use of the PDF files. So could you explain more about this point and why you are reducing the PDF files?
So one of the challenges with PDFs is that they're less accessible. So when we're thinking about users who have more challenges using the internet, so people who are using screen readers or using different devices, so potentially using their mobile, PDFs tend to be less accessible. They're more difficult to sort of use when you're using your mobile. So the experience is less effective. It also means that you've got a static data set. So you're not going to be able to reuse any of that data in a particularly effective way. We also think quite a lot about how search engines use our websites and our content. So again, by having PDFs, use the use of working with organizations such as Google to make sure that things like a voice technology works well. So we've been working with Alexa and Hey Google in order to make sure that people who use these types of devices as part of their potentially if they have audio visual challenges, and so they use voice controls as well in order to access information on the internet. If it's held within a PDF, then it's invisible quite often to these devices. So just being able to make full use of technologies becomes a lot more difficult if everything is kind of held in a PDF. So we're often, I mentioned before, we want data to be timely and relevant. It makes it much more difficult to update, to change if it's in a PDF as well. So we tend to avoid where possible to publish via PDFs, and instead encourage HTML publishing of all of our policies, of all of the guidance that's on gov.uk, in order to make sure that the data is fully usable and fully accessible. So that's what I mean about reducing PDFs. I hope that helps answer the question.
Perfect. We are moving to the next question from the anonymous attendee. He said, thank you, dear. Thank you for sharing all this information. So would you please give us a brief information about UK open data strategy?
Okay, so the open data strategy, which I talked about a little bit before, was thinking about how we enable the delivery of better public services through better access to good data. So it speaks a lot around that, and it talks about how our ambitions for driving open and trusted and ethical approaches to data. I think as we have seen new innovation and automative technologies enter the commonplace, so thinking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain technologies, we need to make sure that the use of those technologies is responsible and it's the right technology for the job as well. So when we're thinking about how to keep pace with innovation, the strategy and our approach to how we think about data, we're always having to make sure that we're able to provide guidance from the centre that the use of these technologies is going to be driving open, trust and ethical approach to data collection and usage. That's really important to both supporting innovation and improving data science capability to make use of data in the UK. So the strategy really is thinking about, as we move forward with innovative technology, how do we make good use of data, and how do we make sure that it's responsibly used? There's quite a lot as well that I spoke to in the presentation about making sure that data is open to, and I think the strategy really speaks to this transparency with citizens, because we're determined to create this environment where openness can succeed because of the benefits that we see from transparency, from being able to reuse data, but also public trust, and making sure that we're not using data inappropriately, and thinking about monitoring society for illegitimate purposes, or for reasons that don't fit with ethical status of the United Kingdom. So the strategy really speaks to those points, and the action plan for open government is really the latest point in that strategy. And these are the principles that we've been revising as we continue to commit to digital modernization and increased accessibility through the use of good data, and thinking about how to scale these technologies that can help us with these massive efficiency gains across government. So hoping that I'm able to recap on some of those points through the slides, that really, I hope, helps you to understand a little bit more about our data strategy in government.
The next question from Haytham Al-Jabri. His question is, do you face any problem once you open data to public?
So this is, I think this, you've articulated so well the risk that we're trying to mitigate through the use of good and responsible data usage, right, in government. So you can see definitely the problems that can be faced once you open data to the public. And you know, we're all familiar with government scandals when reports have been left on trains or data has been hacked, and the damage that can be done in these situations. So we work quite closely with the National Cybersecurity Agency and our Ministries of Defence and Justice to make sure that the policies and the technology approaches that we're taking are in place to ensure that, to mitigate this risk of inappropriate data being released to the public. So that's sort of one side of it. The other side of it is opening data sets to the public, and potential problems that I guess I could identify. If you open data and the data is not timely or accurate, and then that data is being consumed by another entity for their own business or user purposes, the problems come in when the data is not kept up to date. So we talk quite a lot about good data. And the problems come in, these problems with inaccurate data that reduces public trust, or inaccurate or old data that means that people don't want to use a service because it's not reliable or it's out of date. So these things are so important for us to keep our data sets good, to keep them clean, and to keep them timely. So a lot of the focus is around how do we ensure that the data sets are of good quality, and a lot of our data science capability is focused on how to make sure that we work with the rest of government when we're collecting data and when we're accessing potential data sets that are available in the public, to make sure that they are of a good quality. And government has a role to play in that as well. And if we think about government, often holds canonical sources of data. So often governments hold data which is related to addresses, census data, thinking about public health data. So it's really important that when we're working with other government ministries, other government agencies, that as we modernize and as we think about new services, new data collection, we align that with our technology code of practice to ensure that we're creating a sustainable digital ecosystem, one that's driven by consistent data standards and consistent data applications. So the use of API, the use of open source technologies. So we're trying to drive as much as possible a consistent and clean approach to data that through the very process of these things starts mitigating and reducing the risks of collecting bad data from the start. And I think we're much more focused on those types of elements as opposed to, you know, thinking about how we continue to create new services that capture data well, or think about how we are transferring data into modern cloud strategies and things like that, to make sure that as we progress, we continue to produce better data, so that as we move forward, this data is always of a better quality, so that when it's opened up to the public, it's trustworthy, it's timely, and it's reliable, and it can be used in commercial purposes, as we sort of saw in that example of the Transport for London. I think we spend less time trying to digitalize old data. I think we sort of see it as quite expensive, and we continue to look at how do we continue to develop it in the future as we continue to move forward. So there's a number of different elements in that question. Again, I hope I've touched on some useful points.
Fair enough. The next question from Hala Zijali. Hala, question is, how did Brexit affect open data and data protection policies?
So,
I hope that I pronounced it very well.
Yeah, so that the UK leaving the EU Union, I think, so one of the things that we are very keen on, particularly in the government digital service, is we see a great deal of value in interoperability with different, with the rest of the world. Now, whether that's with the EU Union through the use of general privacy restriction policies, GDPR, or whether it's with wider open data barometers or wider open data consortiums across the world, we see a great deal of value in interoperability in terms of relationship building, in terms of thinking about trade, in terms of thinking about opportunities for sharing data in times of crisis for security purposes. So I think as much as possible, we work with multilateral organizations as well to make sure that the UK's approach to open data and data protection policies are being based on global best practices, not just EU best practices, to make sure that we can take advantage of all the benefits of global interoperability of good data and the benefits that can come out of the back of that. So possibly, I think, and I don't think it's changed particularly how we think about open data and data protection policies. I think it just means that I think in our ambition to continue to interoperate globally, I think it just changes the lens on it slightly, or it just opens it up further, that when we're not prioritizing the EU data protection policies over and above anyone else's, we're trying to think about interoperability with the rest of the world globally as opposed to just the EU. So I think that's probably my diplomatic answer to that question.
We are moving now to the next question from Khairat Al-Maskari. Her question is, what is the benefit to the developer of open data application?
So I think this speaks to many developers and many innovators have great ideas. You know, they think of some data set that's available, and they think of the what's possible, and how could this provide something that people want to pay for? How could this turn into a service that yeah, as I said, people want to pay for? How do I think about it as a thing that's going to create time efficiencies, savings, and all of these things? So having the data sets open means that innovative small companies can have an idea. So let's take the transport application. When that started, it was, you know, a couple of guys working in a small office, and they were like, wouldn't it be great if we could tell what time the tube or the train was going to come in real time, as opposed to just the timetable, because the timetable is not always kept to in the UK, let me just be honest. So, you know, they knew that there were these open data sets that they could consume. And that application started off very, very simple, that Transport for London application, where it was just talking about, they were able to pull from Transport for London which of our underground lines were working well, which of the underground lines were having problems that day or at that particular moment in time. And so therefore, travellers could expect delays. Over time, those developers have as we're sort of demonstrated, created a huge ecosystem of all of the information of all of the different transport providers in London, and created a huge amount of real-time data that lots of different consumers can make use of. And so you can sort of see the potential from something very small that over a decade has turned into one of the most used mobile applications in London, and one of the most useful ones that has generated a huge amount of income, not just for those developers who came up with this great idea to meet a problem or to solve a problem, but, you know, has had a whole load of secondary benefits as well. So I think that the benefit of open data to developers is just the freedom to innovate, the freedom to problem solve, and the possibility that they can commercialize on that as well. So we're trying, you know, at the same time we're benefiting the UK economy by just having this data open. The government doesn't have to invest any more time in it than that, just have the data open, which we want to do anyway, so we can be transparent. So it's sort of like an amazing secondary benefit to transparency, that data, that developers can just pick it up and then use it in a way that they've kind of come up with. So you can again then sort of see that why it's important to make sure that the data that we're releasing has been ethically collected, it's been securely stored, so that we are confident that they can take it and they can do whatever they want with it, and it's not going to damage an individual, it's not going to damage the reputation of a government or a company or anything like that. So you can sort of start seeing again how these patchwork of individual pieces of policy or importance or guidance on thinking about data ethics all sort of starts coming into play, but ultimately means that a developer can come in with a great idea and build something and potentially financially benefit from it in an appropriate commercial way.
We reach to the end of the session, but we have 2 minutes to answer one of the questions. Question from Maqbool al-Blushi. He said in his question, which government initiative should be responsible for DDS?
So in Government Digital Service, we're part of the Cabinet Office. So we sit at the centre of government, and we're agnostic to all other ministries and departments, which is quite useful, because we have the authority from the central part of government in order to govern the use of how digital is used and developed in the UK. It also means that from the centre, we've got a really good point to sort of see where efficiencies can be gained, or where departments could potentially join up on a particular problem. I know that we're very short of time, and I was about to launch into a big dialogue about how difficult it sometimes is in governments. We sit in silos. So quite often us sitting outside and being able to look in helps to break down those silos across government, because we don't think about them. We think about government as a whole. So we're managed outside in a centrally located body responsible for GDS in the Cabinet Office, which is part of the central body of government and Parliament in the UK.
Perfect. So sadly, we reach to the end of this so valuable and very good conversation about this session with you, Ms. Alex. You know, the time runs so quickly in this session. So we'd like to thank you so much for this session, talking about the open data and the decision making. So valuable slides, so valuable informations, very interactive questions. So before we conclude this, do you have any final word for the audience in Oman in this field before we end?
Just to say thank you so much for spending your morning with me, spending some of your time in the morning with me. I know it's always busy and difficult to find time to dedicate to these types of things. So thank you. Thank you for engaging with your questions. I often find the question and answer section of these presentations as you say, slightly more valuable and interactive. So I'm pleased that you had so many questions for me, and I hope that I was able to provide some useful insights for you. I guess the only other thing to say is everything that I've talked about here is available from the gov.uk website. I'm more than happy to send through the presentation and links to relevant parts of gov.uk that speak to some of these points if people are more interested in follow-up reading. And again, best wishes and endeavours for all of your work for digital transformation. It's a long journey and it doesn't happen overnight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. So honorable from you talking about this and having you in the session. Also, the thanks goes to the team in the Ministry of, Ministry in the Marketing and Awareness team who coordinate and supervise this session. And looking forward to see you again and meet you again here in Oman, Ms. Alex, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you and see you. شكرا لكم جزيلا الحضور الكريم على حضوركم في هذه الدردشة الرقمية، واللقيا إذا إن شاء الله في دردشة رقمية الأسبوع القادم أو ربما الأسبوع الذي بعد القادم. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Alex Sergirov, the head of international delivery at the UK's government digital service. She was with us in this session talking about the open data and the decision making. Thank you and see you soon next week, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.